Inside America's record 2025 execution year, last meal's final moments, and the cost of justice. It always begins in silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels engineered. The kind that exists just before midnight, when an entire prison seems to hold its breath. Fluorescent lights hum. Doors remain locked. Radios sit quiet. Somewhere deep inside America's most controlled institutions, a clock moves closer to a moment that can never be reversed. In 2025, the United States recorded one of its most intense years for executions in modern history. Not because of spectacle, not because of noise, but because of how routine it almost became, buried behind paperwork, court orders, sealed doors, and words like protocol and procedure. Tonight, we're going inside that final corridor, from the last meal to the final moments, and everything the public never sees in between. This isn't about shock. This is about truth and the system that carries it out. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. By the time 2025 entered official records, it wasn't just another calendar year. Legal analysts noticed it first, then prison watchdogs, then defense attorneys who had spent decades filing last-minute appeals, more death warrants, shorter gaps between rulings, and a noticeable shift in how states accelerated their timelines. For the first time in years, execution chambers across multiple states didn't feel dormant. They felt active. But behind every statistic was a person, a facility, a team of employees trained to carry out an irreversible duty. This is not a story about guilt or innocence alone. It's a story about process, pressure, and what happens inside American prisons when the system decides time is up, the prison before the prison. To understand execution year 2025, you first need to understand where these men and women were housed. Death row isn't a single place. It's a concept spread across fortified wings in maximum security prisons. Concrete units designed for isolation. Limited human contact. Movement logged by the minute. Most death row inmates live alone in cells smaller than a parking space. Meals are slid through slots. Showers are timed. Recreation, if it happens at all, is often alone. Inside steel cages locals sometimes call dog runs. By the time an execution warrant is signed, the inmate has already lived years, sometimes decades, inside this controlled environment. But once the date is set, everything changes. When the warrant arrives, the moment an execution date becomes official is rarely dramatic. No announcement over loudspeakers. No confrontation. A correctional officer arrives with paperwork. A supervisor witnesses the exchange. The inmate signs acknowledgement, not consent, but receipt. From that moment forward, the prison enters a countdown phase. Special teams are assembled. Shifts are reassigned. Mental health staff are placed on standby, not just for the inmate, but for the officers too, because execution isn't carried out by the system alone. It's carried out by people. The hidden logistics of final days. In 2025, one of the least discussed realities of America's execution process was logistics. Transportation routes are mapped inside the facility. Backup generators are tested. Medical equipment is inspected, not for treatment, but for confirmation. Witness lists are reviewed and approved. Victims' family members, media representatives, state officials, each name vetted, each identity confirmed. Even the execution chamber itself is checked repeatedly, not to ensure comfort, but to ensure certainty. Nothing is left to chance. The last meal, myth versus reality. Public imagination often focuses on the last meal, but here's the truth. In most states by 2025, extravagant requests were no longer the norm. Policies had tightened. Some facilities offered only a standard tray. Others allowed limited choices within strict guidelines. No symbolism. No ceremonies. Just food delivered at a scheduled time, eaten alone under observation. And according to multiple former wardens, the most striking thing wasn't what was eaten, but how little of it was. Because by then, appetite is no longer the point. The final visits, In the days or sometimes hours before an execution, visits may be allowed. Not always, not unlimited, not guaranteed. Glass partitions remain. Phones crackle. Time is monitored with ruthless precision. Some inmates speak softly. Others say almost nothing. A few attempt humor, an effort to make the unbearable feel human. For families, these moments don't feel like goodbye. They feel like interruption, because guards are always present, and the clock never stops. The night shift. Executions don't happen in the chaos of the day. They happen at night, when staffing is minimal, when outside distractions are fewer, when the prison can be sealed off from the world. By 2025, night execution protocols have become standard in most states that still carried out capital punishment. Correctional officers assigned to the unit often volunteered, or were chosen quietly based on experience. Not everyone can do this job, and not everyone who does it ever talks about it again. Walking the final hall. There is a corridor inside many American prisons known unofficially as the Last Walk. It's not marked. It's not ceremonial. It's just a hallway that exists between a holding cell and an execution chamber. According to former staff, this walk is rarely chaotic. It is slow, controlled, and disturbingly quiet. Restraints are applied, procedures followed, no words wasted, because protocol demands neutrality. Inside the execution chamber, the chamber itself is often smaller than expected. Bright lights, clinical layout, glass separating witnesses from the process. Medical personnel are present, but their role is strictly defined and legally limited. Everything here is documentation focused. Time is logged, observations recorded. This is not a place for improvisation. It is a place designed to end uncertainty. The final statement. In 2025, many inmates declined to give final statements. Some cited exhaustion, others distrust. Some simply chose silence. But when statements were given, they followed no pattern. Apologies, declarations of innocence, forgiveness, or words meant for only one person watching from behind glass. And once spoken, they became part of the permanent record, unchangeable. What happens to the prison afterward? The execution ends, but the prison does not return to normal. Staff debriefings follow. Reports are written. Mental health services are quietly offered. The unit is cleaned, the chamber closed, the hallway reopened, and by morning, the prison resumes operations. Breakfast trays move again. Gates open. Count resumes. Because incarceration doesn't pause for history. 2025, the legal backlash. What made 2025 different wasn't just a number of executions. It was the reaction. Emergency appeals surged. Federal reviews intensified. Debates reignited nationwide. Some states defended their timelines as lawful efficiency. Others paused, citing ethical uncertainty and public pressure. Prisons, caught in between, became frontline witnesses to a national argument that never fully entered their walls, but controlled their schedules entirely. The people who carry the weight. Executions leave marks, not just on records, but on people. Former correctional officers have described sleepless nights. Medical professionals have quietly resigned. Chaplains have spoken a prayer said long after chambers closed. In 2025, the human cause behind execution statistics became impossible to ignore for those inside the system. And yet, the machinery continued. The question no protocol answers. Here's the truth the system never prints in manuals. No procedure explains how to carry memory. No checklist covers moral residue. No training prepares you for what silence sounds like afterward. And that's where 2025 leaves us. Not with closure, but with a question. What does justice look like when the doors close and the witnesses go home? Inside the execution team. Every execution year leaves behind an invisible roster. Not the inmates, the staff. By 2025, execution teams were no longer ad hoc groups pulled together at the last minute. In several states, they became semi-permanent units. Officers, supervisors, medical observers, and legal witnesses trained not just to perform, but to withstand. What most people never learn is this. No single person carries out an execution alone. Responsibility is intentionally divided. Actions are layered. Decisions are dispersed. It's designed that way so no one person can say, I did this. Only, I followed protocol. The role of the warden. If there is one individual who feels the full gravity of execution night, it is the warden. By 2025, many wardens described execution days as the heaviest responsibility of their careers, not because of public scrutiny, but because everything ultimately flows through them. They sign final confirmations, authorize movements, confirm identities, and in the end, it's the warden who gives the final signal that time has expired, not as judge, not as executioner, but as administrator of the state's decision. The chaplain's last duty. Chaplains occupy one of the most complex roles inside execution protocols. They are permitted presence, but limited influence. They offer comfort, but cannot interfere. They speak faith, but not judgment. In 2025, chaplains described final hours spent listening far more than speaking. Confessions without absolution. Questions without answers. Silence heavier than prayer. And once the process begins, they step back, leaving the inmate alone with the system. Media witnesses, watching without participation. Journalists allowed to witness executions are bound by strict rules. No devices, no recording, no commentary inside the chamber. By 2025, media witnesses described a paradox. They were present, but powerless. Close, but disconnected. Their job wasn't to intervene. It was to observe. And later, to translate silence into language for the public, without emotion, speculation, or deviation, what the public never sees. The execution is the moment people debate, but the prison absorbs what comes after. Cells are reassigned. Property is inventoried. Personal effects, letters, glasses, clothing, are boxed and labeled. Some items go to families. Others remain unclaimed. And somewhere inside a storage room, a life becomes file. Death row after the execution. When an execution occurs, death row shifts. Inmates hear about it before official confirmation spreads. Through ventilation systems. Through footsteps. Through the subtle change in staff demeanor. In 2025, psychologists noted a phenomenon across death row units. Silence deepened. Movement slowed. Sleep patterns changed. Because every execution reminds the remaining inmates of one thing. Time is not theoretical. The legal system's final door. One of the defining features of 2025 was a collapse of last-minute stays. Courts moved faster. Appeals were resolved quicker. Deadlines hardened. For some inmates, hope evaporated not with a gavel, but with an unread email, a denied motion, a phone call that never came. The law didn't shout. It simply stopped responding. Victims' families. Expectation versus reality. For victims' families, execution is often presented as closure. But those who attended in 2025 described a different outcome. Some felt relief. Others felt emptiness. A few felt unexpected grief. Not for the inmate, but for the finality itself. Because executions don't restore what was taken. They conclude a sentence, but not a story. A system under pressure. By mid-2025, correctional institutions face pressure from all directions. Legal scrutiny, staff burnout, public debate reignited nationwide. Internal memos reflected concerns rarely seen before about sustainability, morale, and the psychological toll of routine executions. The system wasn't collapsing, but it was straining. The execution that changed everything. Late in the year, one execution shifted the conversation, not because of protest, not because of chaos, but because of what happened after. Multiple staff members requested transfers. A senior officer retired weeks later. A routine chamber report included an unusual note, brief, factual, but unprecedented. It read, staff exhibited visible distress beyond expected parameters. For the first time, the institution acknowledged what had always been denied, that executions leave measurable scars. The myth of normalcy. There is a myth that prisons return to normal after executions. In reality, normal changes. Officers speak less. Eyes linger longer. Conversations become practical, never philosophical, because philosophy has no place where decisions are final. The quiet resignations. One of the least publicized consequences of 2025 was resignation. Not mass walkouts. Not protests. Quiet departures. Officers who transferred units. Medical professionals who declined reassignment. Administrators who sought early retirement. No press releases followed. Just vacancies. What history will say? Years from now, historians may argue over numbers. How many? How fast? How justified? But numbers will never capture the atmosphere inside those walls. The nights, the paperwork, the final walks. History documents outcomes. Prisons live consequences. The twist no one expects. Here is the part rarely discussed. By the end of 2025, several wardens admitted, off record, that the year changed them permanently. Not politically, not ideologically, but humanly. Because overseeing execution after execution does something no training anticipates. It teaches you how fragile certainty really is. The real legacy of 2025. 2025 won't be remembered just for how many executions occurred. It will be remembered as a year the system realized it was being watched, not by protesters or courts, but by its own people. The guards, the nurses, the administrators, those who had to live with the outcome. Closing thought. Behind concrete walls and steel doors, the state carried out its final authority. Quietly, procedurally, legally. But authority does not erase weight. And as America moves forward, one question lingers inside every execution chamber ever used. When justice is carried out to completion, who carries what remains? The doors close, but the question remains. When the final report is filed, when the witnesses leave, when the prison lights return to their usual glow, the system moves on. But the truth is, justice doesn't echo inside courtrooms alone. It lives in corridors that never make the news, in jobs done without applause, in moments no camera is allowed to record. 2025 will be remembered as a record year, a year of numbers, rulings, and irreversible outcomes. But behind those records are people who stood inside concrete walls and carried out the law exactly as written, whether agreed with them or not. This documentary wasn't meant to tell you what to believe. It was meant to show you what exists. Because the real story of execution in America isn't found in headlines. It's found in silence, in procedure, and in the unanswered wait that follows. And as those prison doors close once again, one final truth remains. History will judge the decisions, but humanity will remember the cost. Thank you for watching.